In the gleaming command center of the Galactic Hegemony's flagship Eternal Dominance, Supreme Commander Vex Kornar stood with his forearms clasped behind his back, his silvery scales reflecting the holographic displays surrounding him. The latest battle reports scrolled across his neural interface, each one more disturbing than the last. His upper right hand unconsciously traced the honored battle scars on his neck, a habit he'd developed over 3 centuries of military service. Sir Communications Officer Zaratel's voice wavered slightly. "We've lost contact with the Proxima outpost. Again." Vex Corner's secondary eyes narrowed while his primary set remained fixed on the tactical display. "Impossible. We just reinforced that position with 2 full battalions of Crachnid warriors." The last transmission mentioned something about the humans using the asteroid field as, and I quote, "some kind of cosmic pinball machine." Zara's tentacles twisted nervously around her console. Vex let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a growl. These primitives barely mastered faster than light travel a century ago. They can't possibly be. His voice trailed off as the tactical display updated. The entire Proxima asteroid field had been turned into a devastating weapon. Somehow, the humans had calculated and altered the trajectories of thousands of asteroids, creating a cascading effect that had literally pulverized the outpost between waves of space rocks. The technological precision required for such a maneuver was, well, it should have been impossible for such a young species. "Show me the casualty reports," Vex commanded, trying to keep the unease out of his voice. The numbers that appeared made his stomach acids curdle. 3,000 Crachnid warriors, Zara whispered. "Gone in less than 6 minutes. And the humans," Vex demanded. "That's the thing." Sir Zara's voice dropped even lower. "We didn't detect a single human ship in the sector during the entire attack." Vex's scales rippled in agitation. This was the 12th impossible attack this cycle, each one more creative and devastating than the last, each one defying conventional military logic, each one making him question everything he thought he knew about warfare. Sir Zara's voice interrupted his thoughts. "High Command is requesting your assessment of the human threat level. They're concerned about your previous classification of them as primitive annoyances." Vex Kornar, veteran of the Andromeda Crusades and hero of the Crab Nebula expansion, felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries: genuine fear. These humans weren't just fighting outside the box. They had taken the box, turned it into a weapon, and were now using it to beat his forces into submission. "Tell High Command," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "that we may need to reconsider everything we thought we knew about warfare, and send me every scrap of information we have about Earth's history of conflict. I want to know how these Deathworlders learned to fight like this." As the words left his mouth, another alert flashed across the tactical display. This time, Vex didn't even try to hide his reaction. By the void, he breathed. "They're doing it again. But this time they're using a star's own coronal mass ejections as a weapon. Who are these people?" The war room of the Eternal Dominance hummed with anxious energy as 12 of the Hegemony's most decorated military minds gathered around the quantum holographic projector. Strategic Master Lyra Pax, her crystalline form refracting light in subtle patterns of distress, manipulated the controls with her energy tendrils. "Play it again," she commanded, her harmonically resonant voice tight with frustration. "Focus on Sector 7. The hologram flickered to life, showing what should have been a perfect ambush of a human supply convoy. The Hegemony forces had everything in their favor: superior numbers, positioned along optimal vectors, state-of-the-art cloaking technology. Then, somehow, everything went wrong. Their intelligence chief Raven Dax slammed his chitinous appendage on the table. His compound eyes whirred as they adjusted focus. "Watch what they did with those civilian mining ships." The assembled generals leaned forward as the scene unfolded. The seemingly vulnerable human convoy suddenly split apart, each ship executing maneuvers that should have torn them to pieces. The mining vessels, loaded with industrial drilling equipment, spun in impossible patterns, their drilling beams cutting through space in a deadly dance. They turned mining ships into a defensive grid. Lyra Pax's voice carried notes of both admiration and horror. "Those beam patterns. They're creating a 3-dimensional web of destruction." But the energy calculations required General Cross-Vax's metallic scales rattled. No organic brain could process that in real time. Raven Dax chittered darkly. "They're not processing it in real time. Look at the timestamp correlations. They planned this. They knew we were there, knew exactly where we'd be positioned. They turned our own ambush protocols against us." The footage continued, showing the devastating result. Hegemony ships, trying to adjust to the unexpected defense, flew right into pre-calculated killing zones. The humans hadn't just defeated the ambush, they'd turned it into their own hunting ground. Conventional doctrine states that when faced with superior forces, a species will either surrender or retreat to preserve their population. Lyra Pax's crystalline structure dimmed slightly. These humans, they look at those same scenarios and see opportunities. They're insane, someone muttered from the back of the room. No, Raven Dax corrected, manipulating his own set of controls. They're experienced. Look at this historical data I've compiled. New images filled the holographic space, thousands of years of human warfare, ancient battles with primitive weapons, guerrilla campaigns against superior forces, endless adaptations and innovations in the art of combat. Their entire history is an unbroken chain of conflict, Dax continued. While we were perfecting formation combat and honor duels, they were learning to weaponize everything around them. And I mean everything. Surely they must have some predictable patterns, Lyra Pax argued, her crystalline form pulsing with concentrated thought. All species do. That's just it. Dax pulled up another tactical analysis. Their only consistent pattern is inconsistency. Look at these battle statistics. When we expect them to advance, they retreat. When we expect a retreat, they charge. They use civilian equipment as weapons, turn defensive positions into offensive launching points, and somehow manage to violate tactical doctrines that have stood for millennia. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Their entire military structure was based on predictable, logical responses to threat scenarios. But these humans, they seemed to thrive on chaos itself. Supreme Commander Vex Kornar, who had been quietly observing until now, finally spoke. "We're not just fighting their weapons or their ships," he said gravely. "We're fighting against their entire approach to warfare. And right now we're trying to play Regency chess while they're flipping the board and using the pieces as projectiles." The analogy hung in the air as another alert sounded. More reports of impossible human victories were coming in. The gathered generals exchanged worried looks, each wondering the same thing: how do you fight an enemy that refuses to follow the rules of war itself? The 7th Galactic Fleet approaches Europa, Supreme Commander Strategic Master Lyra Pax announced, her crystalline form glowing with pride. Admiral Thresh Blackwing reports optimal attack conditions. Vex Corner watched the tactical display as 5,000 of the Hegemony's finest warships moved into position around Jupiter's ice moon. The 7th Fleet, pride of the Galactic Hegemony, undefeated in 37 major engagements. Their very name struck fear into the hearts of enemies across 3 spiral arms of the galaxy. "The humans are putting up no resistance," Intelligence Chief Raven Dax observed, his compound eyes tracking multiple data streams. Scans show minimal defensive installations, no fleet presence, just a few scattered settlements under the ice. Finally, General Vax rumbled, "A straightforward engagement. Take the moon, establish a foothold in their solar system, and..." The tactical display exploded with activity. By the eternal void, Lyra Pax's crystalline structure flickered in shock. The moon. The entire moon is moving. They watched in horror as Europa's icy surface began to crack. Not randomly, but in precise, geometrical patterns. Massive chunks of ice shifted, revealing what lay beneath. The humans had hollowed out the entire moon, turning it into the largest trap in military history. Multiple launches detected. Raven Dax's chitinous fingers flew across his console. Thousands are those modified ice mining platforms. The human devices shot out from under Europa's fragmenting surface, each trailing cables made of something the sensors couldn't quite identify. The 7th Fleet, caught in the middle of their attack formation, had nowhere to go. "They're using the ice fragments as anchors," Lyra Pax whispered in horrified fascination. "Those cables. They're creating a 3-dimensional web around our fleet." Admiral Thresh Blackwing's voice crackled over the command channel, taking evasive action. All ships, break formation, and the transmission cut off as the humans sprang their trap. The cables suddenly lit up with energy, connecting the ice fragments in a complex geometric pattern. Each intersection point began generating localized gravity fields, turning Europa's debris field into a crushing weapon. The 7th Fleet found themselves caught in a web of overlapping gravitational forces, being pulled apart in dozens of directions simultaneously. "Impossible readings from those gravity generators," Raven Dax reported, his voice shaking. They're using the mass of Jupiter itself to amplify the effect." They watched helplessly as the pride of the hegemony was systematically torn apart. ships designed to withstand the forces of faster-than-light travel crumpled like children's toys. The humans had turned one of the basic forces of nature itself into a weapon of mass destruction. Status of the 7th Fleet Vex Corner demanded, already knowing the answer. Total losses approaching 80%, Lyra Pax reported, her voice carrying harmonic overtones of distress. The survivors, they're in full retreat, Supreme Commander. The humans aren't pursuing Raven, Dax added. They're salvaging our ships, adding our own technology to their arsenal. The war room erupted in chaos. Generals argued frantically, their various alien physiologies displaying signs of extreme stress. Crystalline forms flickered erratically, scales changed colors, compound eyes whirred in agitation. How General Crossvax demanded. How did they convert an entire moon into a weapon without us noticing? Those settlements we detected, Raven Dax's voice was bitter. They weren't settlements at all. They were engineering teams disguised as civilian installations. Every ice mining operation, every research station, they were all part of the trap. We didn't just lose the 7th Fleet, we lost it to a plan that may have been in motion for years. Supreme Commander Vex Kornar stood silent, watching the debris of his finest ships drift in the space around Europa. The humans hadn't just defeated the 7th Fleet, they had shattered the very notion of what was possible in warfare. They had looked at a moon and seen not a strategic position to be taken, but a weapon waiting to be built. Send word to High Command, he finally spoke, his voice heavy. The situation is far worse than we imagined. These humans, they don't just adapt to warfare. They reshape entire worlds to suit their combat needs. He paused, watching as human ships methodically collected their prizes from the battlefield. And tell them we need to seriously consider the possibility that we may not be the superior civilization we thought we were. The silence that followed was broken only by the continuing stream of damage reports, each one hammering home the same terrifying message: the hegemony had finally met its match. And the galaxy would never be the same. Field Commander Tyrix Vox stared at the resignation requests piling up on his neural interface. 300 veteran warriors, all requesting immediate transfer away from the human front. These weren't fresh recruits or support staff, these were battle-hardened soldiers who had faced the worst horrors the galaxy had to offer. Play the field recording, he commanded his AI assistant. I need to understand what broke them. The holographic display flickered to life, showing footage from the failed invasion of a human colony world designated HD 2184. The scene started normally enough: hegemony forces advancing through a dense jungle environment under heavy cloud cover. Sir Lieutenant Kira Sen's voice trembled as she delivered her report to the War Council. What you're about to see, it defies explanation. The assembled alien leaders watched as the clouds above the advancing army suddenly began to churn. Not naturally, they moved with purpose, forming massive vortexes that reached down toward the ground. They weaponized the weather, Kira continued, her bioluminescent patches pulsing with remembered fear. Those weren't normal storms. The humans had seeded the atmosphere with nanites, turning the entire planet's weather system into a precision weapon. The footage showed hegemony troops being lifted off their feet, their advanced armor useless against the precisely controlled windstorms, but that wasn't the worst part. As the soldiers were suspended helplessly in the air, the clouds began to conduct electricity. The lightning, it targeted our shield frequencies perfectly. Kira's voice cracked. They'd studied our defensive technologies, found the resonant frequencies, and turned the sky itself into a tuned EMP weapon. Strategic Master Lyra Pax's crystalline form dimmed noticeably, and the solar radiation attacks on Proxima B. Even worse, Intelligence Chief Raven Dax chittered nervously. They developed a way to create focused magnetic corridors through the star's corona, essentially turned the entire star into a directed energy weapon. Lost 3 fortress worlds in less than an hour. Supreme Commander Vex Kornar reviewed the psychological evaluation reports streaming in from across the front. The patterns were clear and deeply troubling. His forces weren't just losing battles, they were losing their will to fight. The humans have achieved something unprecedented, he addressed the council. They've made the universe itself seem hostile to our forces. Every rock could be a disguised weapon. Every weather pattern could be under their control. Every natural phenomenon could be turned against us at any moment. There are reports from the ground forces, Kira added quietly. They say the humans laugh during battle. Actually laugh, like it's all some grand game to them. The council chamber fell silent. The concept of finding joy in the chaos of combat was alien to their orderly military minds. Yet these humans seemed to thrive on it, seemed to draw strength from the very unpredictability they created. We trained our forces to be the perfect military machine Lyra Pax observed. The humans trained to be chaos itself. Correction, Raven Dax interrupted. They didn't train for chaos, they evolved in it. Their entire planet is a death world that actively tries to kill them. We never stood a chance. Vex Corner looked out at the stars through the command center's viewport, wondering how many of them now held human weapons they couldn't even comprehend yet. His scales rippled with a newfound emotion, a complex mixture of terror and respect. Perhaps he mused, that's why they laugh. To them, war isn't about perfect formation or superior technology. It's about survival. And they've been surviving impossible odds since before they learned to walk upright. The war room of the eternal dominance had become a symphony of chaos. Emergency alerts blared from every console as reports flooded in from across 20 star systems simultaneously. Supreme Commander Vex Kornar's scales had turned a pale gray, a sign of extreme stress in his species. Status report, he barked, watching as the tactical display became a storm of red warning indicators. Multiple simultaneous attacks across the Orion Spur strategic master Lyra Pax's crystalline form pulsed erratically with each new report. They're hitting everything at once. Impossible, General Cross Vax sputtered. Our analysis showed they didn't have the fleet capacity for an operation this size. They don't, Intelligence Chief Raven Dax confirmed, his compound eyes spinning wildly. These aren't traditional fleet engagements. They're... Supreme Commander, you need to see this. The main holographic display split into multiple feeds. Each one showed a different human attack, and each one defied every principle of conventional warfare they'd ever known. Gamma Sector Lyra Pax reported, her voice carrying harmonics of pure disbelief. They've infected our quantum communication relays with some kind of mimetic virus. Our own encrypted transmissions are reorganizing themselves into attack commands. But Delta Quadrant, Raven Dax chittered. They've somehow reversed the polarity of our planetary shield systems. The defensive barriers are collapsing inward, crushing our own bases. Sector 7 reporting complete loss of navigational control, another officer called out. The humans have quantum entangled their FTL wake signatures. Every time our ships try to plot an intercept course, they're being redirected into their own crossfire. Vex Corner watched as centuries of carefully planned defensive networks crumbled. The humans weren't just attacking their positions, they were turning the hegemony's own technological advantages into weapons against them. New signal from Beta Centauri, Lyra Pax's crystalline structure almost shattered from the shock. They've somehow weaponized dark matter itself. The space between stars is being used to transmit kinetic energy directly into our hull plating. That's not possible, General Crossvax protested. The energy requirements alone would be. Attention all commands, a new voice cut across all channels. Human voice. Calm. Almost amused. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. What you're witnessing is approximately 5% of our actual military capability. We thought you should know that before we continue this conversation. The war room fell silent. 5%. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. They're not fighting a war, Raven Dax whispered, his chitinous mandibles clicking rapidly. They've been conducting a galaxy-wide capabilities demonstration. More reports poured in. A human device had turned an entire nebula into an electromagnetic pulse weapon. Another had created a cascade of temporal paradoxes, trapping a hegemony battle group in an endless loop of their own destruction. A third had somehow weaponized the quantum observer effect itself, turning the very act of scanning for human ships into a targeting system for their weapons. New transmission, Lyra Pax announced. It's a technical readout of how they achieved these attacks. They're showing us exactly how they did it. Why would they reveal their methods, General Crossvax demanded. Because Vex Corner replied, finally understanding, they want us to know that these weren't lucky accidents or desperate gambits. Each attack was carefully planned, meticulously executed, and completely reproducible. They're not just beating us, they're teaching us a lesson. The tactical display continued to light up with new attacks. Each one more creative than the last. Each one demonstrating a level of scientific understanding that made the hegemony's most advanced technology look primitive in comparison. Look at these timestamps, Raven Dax suddenly called out. These attacks. Many of them were set up months ago, some of them years. Every time we thought we were pushing them back, forcing them to react. They were letting us move exactly where they wanted us. Vex Corner finished. Every retreat was planned. Every defeated human force was a lure. Every seemingly vulnerable position was a trap waiting to be sprung. Supreme Commander Lyra Pax's voice carried a note of finality. High Command is requesting immediate strategic assessment and recommended course of action. Vex Corner looked at the devastation displayed before him. Centuries of military doctrine proved not just ineffective but actively harmful against this new type of warfare. The humans hadn't just changed the rules of the game, they'd been playing an entirely different game from the start. Tell High Command, he said slowly, that we aren't fighting a war anymore. We're participating in our own tactical education. And right now, class is in session. As if to punctuate his words, another human transmission cut across all frequencies. Lesson 1. Admiral Chen's voice carried a hint of amusement. Never start a war with the species that turned survival itself into an art form. Shall we discuss terms of surrender? Or would you like to see what 10% of our capability looks like? The peace delegation chamber aboard the neutral station Harmony Point fell into stunned silence as the human representatives finished their presentation. Supreme Commander Vex Kornar's scales had lost all color, while Strategic Master Lyra Pax's crystalline form had dimmed to near transparency. Let me be certain I understand. Vex Corner spoke carefully, all four hands trembling slightly. Everything we've seen so far, the weaponized moons, the dark matter manipulation, the stellar engineering, were basically our equivalent of warning shots. Human Ambassador Marcus Rodriguez completed the thought, taking a casual sip from his coffee. You see, we have a protocol for first contact scenarios that turn hostile. We call it the gradual revelation doctrine. Intelligence Chief Raven Dax's compound eyes had stopped spinning entirely, frozen in shock. The orbital defense platforms we detected around Earth. Decoys. Admiral Sarah Chen smiled. Nice ones though, right? We thought they'd make you feel better about your initial invasion plans. The real defensive systems are, well, somewhat more comprehensive. The human lieutenant beside her activated a holographic display. The alien delegation recoiled as the true scope of Earth's defenses became clear. You've weaponized. Time itself. Lyra Pax's voice carried harmonics of pure terror. Among other things, Rodriguez nodded. Those temporal defense grids you're looking at? They're our older models. The new ones are quite a bit more interesting. Would you like to see what we did with quantum superposition cascades? Stop. Vex Corner raised all four hands. Just stop. What I don't understand is why. Why show us all this now? Admiral Chen's smile faded. Because you need to understand something fundamental about humanity. We don't want to rule the galaxy. We don't want to destroy your civilization. What we want is quite simple: to be left alone to explore, trade, and occasionally share a drink with interesting alien species. She gestured to the horrifying display of technological supremacy floating between them. This is just our way of making sure everyone understands that starting a war with Earth is inadvisable. The binary pulsar you turned into a tachyon communication network. Raven Dax chittered nervously. That wasn't for the war at all, was it? Oh, that. Rodriguez chuckled. No, that was just some grad students working on their thesis project. Creative bunch, really. You should see what our actual military research division comes up with. The alien delegation exchanged terrified looks. The humans hadn't just been holding back, they'd been playing with kid gloves while simultaneously developing technologies that rewrote the laws of physics. Ambassador Rodriguez Vex Kornar spoke with as much dignity as he could muster. The Galactic Hegemony would like to formally request immediate peace negotiations. Wonderful. Rodriguez beamed. We brought some excellent Earth whiskey for the occasion. And don't worry about all this military business once we're at peace. We'd be happy to share some of our more practical technological developments. We've got some fascinating terraforming techniques we think you'll love. As the human delegation began preparing for the peace celebrations, Vex Corner leaned over to Raven Dax. Send word to High Command, he whispered. Tell them we didn't just find a worthy adversary. We found a species that treats universal constants as polite suggestions and considers fundamental forces of nature to be more like guidelines. Ambassador Rodriguez overheard and grinned. Oh, you have no idea. Wait until you see what we do for fun. The collective shudder that ran through the alien delegation suggested that perhaps some things were better left undiscovered. One galactic standard year after the peace treaty, Supreme Commander Vex Kornar stood at the podium before the Hegemony High Council, delivering his final report before retirement. The human war, he began, his scales now permanently lighter from the stress of that conflict, cost us 43,000 ships, 8 fortress worlds, 3 entire fleets, and most importantly, our assumptions about our place in the universe. The assembled council members shifted uncomfortably as he continued. We thought ourselves the pinnacle of evolution, the height of technological advancement. We saw a species that had barely reached the stars and assumed they would be easy prey. He let out a harsh laugh. Instead, we found out what happens when you corner a species that turned their death world into a paradise through sheer stubbornness. Strategic Master Lyrapax, her crystalline form now bearing permanent stress fractures from the war, projected the new galactic doctrine onto the chamber walls. As of today, any species classified as a death world evolved race is to be approached with extreme diplomatic caution, and if they show any signs of human-like creativity in combat. Run Intelligence Chief Raven Dax finished, his compound eyes whirring with remembered terror. Run fast, run far, and pray they're in a merciful mood. The council chamber erupted in nervous laughter, quickly silenced as Ambassador Rodriguez strolled in, fashionably late to the proceedings. "Don't be so dramatic," he grinned, causing several council members to flinch. "We're actually quite nice once you get to know us. Besides, thanks to that lovely peace treaty, you all get to benefit from our advances in medical technology, terraforming, and faster-than-light travel." "Yes," Vex Corner replied dryly, "we're eternally grateful that your response to our invasion was to offer technological assistance and trade deals rather than, say, turning our home star into a jazz quartet." "Oh, come on," Rodriguez chuckled. "We'd never do that." He paused for effect. A jazz quartet would be far too simple. Now, a full symphony orchestra. The horrified silence that followed was broken only by the ambassador's hearty laughter and the sound of several council members fainting. In conclusion, Vex Corner sighed. "Let the record show that the greatest military power in known space is a bunch of laughing primates who think reality itself is merely a suggestion. And thank the void they have a sense of humor about it."